Are you two lovely presenters ready?
Born ready.
I love that as the intro. It would have only been better if you'd said hashtag born ready and had some TikTok dance teed up.
Oh, I don't understand TikTok.
I don't either. I'll text you why I'm fascinated with it at the moment.
Hello and welcome everyone to TAO's 2022, I have to get used to saying that now, legislative session preview. We're excited to share our legislative agenda for this year and the ways you and your company can get involved. I'm Skip Newberry. I go by he, him, his pronouns, and I'm TAO President and CEO. I'm joined by fellow TAO staff members, Kara Toronto, Becca Goldberg, and they're both providing background Zoom support. So hopefully we won't screw it up too much for them where they have to stay busy during this. Few Zoom reminders as we get started, not that we need them since we're 22 months into working remote and all online events. All participants have been muted, so please remain on mute unless the TAO staff member unmutes you and calls on you to talk. And you may ask or respond to questions in the chat box publicly or direct private messages to Kara or to Becca. We'll monitor the chat box and respond throughout the discussion. We also ask you all to engage via the participant icon on your screen. We also love it when you engage with us on social media, both during today's session and also throughout the day. We love to share what's happening at TAO and to get your takeaways from our events. One item to note in the spirit of transparency is that we are recording today's event. I'd now like to introduce our advocacy chair, Courtney Lee, who is with Amazon, and she stepped up as our chair just last year. She's going to say a few words, and then when she's done, I'm going to introduce our featured speaker, Rachel Emery with Thorn Run Partners. Courtney?
Thanks, Skip.
Floor is yours.
Good morning, everyone. It's wish we were in person. But here we are. Really excited to be advocacy chair for 2022. We have a great plan for 2022 to start, gaining these tech champions that we've needed for so many years. And we plan to be involved in so many different issues that kind of run the gamut. So really excited to be the chair and would love to get to know all of you at some point virtually or over coffee if you're comfortable, but just really excited for this year and really excited to have Rachel as our lead lobbyist on this team as well. She's going to kill it. It's going to be a crazy session and she's going to do amazing. Rachel, over to you.
Thank you, Courtney. I'm aiming for fine. So if I do amazing, that'd be fantastic. Thanks everyone. As Skip and Courtney said, I'm Rachel Wiggins-Emery from Thorn Run Partners. I'm Senior VP and the lead lobbyist working on behalf of TAO at the Legislature. I figured it would be helpful if I just ran through a PowerPoint. So I'm going to share my screen real quick. Folks see that okay?
Yes.
So I wanted to focus this discussion on answering 4 super simple questions. A quick overview of what short session is. It's only 12 years old at this point, so I figured it'd be helpful to have sort of baseline knowledge. And then what are our dynamics leading into session? What are the issues that you all as TAO members are going to care about? And then what's on the horizon for 2023? Because short session is short and we are going to dive hopefully not right in, but dive back into working on issues for long session. So with that, short session was established in 2010. It is a 35-day session that starts on February 1st and then runs through the first week of March. Just like with long session, they're going to work until they're done working, but constitutionally they are required to be done within the 35 days. Unlike long session where legislators can introduce any number of bills, they're limited to 2 bills each this session, and then each of the committees also get 3 committee bills. So that essentially gives the committee chairs of each bill the ability to introduce a bit more than their fellow legislators. Initially, short session was created to be very narrow in scope. It's really supposed to be on sort of technical fixes for bills that were passed in 2021, as well as budget adjustments in the middle of the biennium. And while both of those things are still present in short session, I think as short sessions evolved over the last 12 years, folks have essentially treated a short session like a short long session. So introducing big bills that they are then aggressively working in that 35-day period. I think in years past, they increased minimum wage. If you all remember, for several short sessions, cap and trade was introduced and discussed and tried to pass. So it's not just a place for simple bills. And we'll get later into our conversation, we'll get into some issues that are going to be relevant to you all. It is important to note that unless a bill is a priority of leadership, typically it needs to have some thorough vetting before it can get passed in short session. Lots of conversations with stakeholders need to happen. Because of this, oftentimes you'll see that short session legislators are reintroducing bills that failed to pass in the long session for whatever reason. Perhaps they got a large fiscal at the end of session, or there were some hangups and they didn't have time to fix it, or people didn't like it and they're trying to fix the problem that people didn't like, and so they're reintroducing it in the short session. And then finally, short session also creates a good opportunity to lay groundwork and build support as you're going into a long session. So oftentimes we'll see at the end of a short session, folks will have informational hearings talking about concepts that they've been working on and will be working on leading up to long session. Sometimes people just introduce bills because they want to spark a conversation, and a great way to get people to talk to you is to run a bill that they hate. So it serves a lot of purposes. It's 35 days, but a lot can happen in those 35 days. So the big question is sort of what are the dynamics going into session, starting with some of the weirdest, which is the logistics, aka the COVID of it all. Short session is going to look a little different than this last long session, which looked a little different or a lot different than your typical sessions. If you all remember, long session was entirely remote. Legislators were in the building because they have to be physically present to vote, but the building was closed to the public. This year, the building is open to the public. Legislators will still be in the building, but the Capitol looks a little different. It has been undergoing construction for several months now, essentially making sure it stays standing when an earthquake comes. The committee rooms are actually closed due to the construction, so committees are going to be fully remote this year. They had tried to do some hybrid models, but while legislators will be in the building and the building will be open to the public still has to participate in the legislative process remotely, which is interesting. Additionally, we heard from leadership that both staff and members have really been encouraged to only be in the building when they need to be in the building, and to really only do meetings remotely. So there is, recognizing that Omicron is supposed to peak in early February, there has been a lot of encouragement from leadership that folks limit their in-person interactions and really try to keep this as virtual as possible, which is great for folks who are looking to interact with the legislature from around the state, but can be really difficult for the me's of the world, the lobbyists who are used to being in the building and interfacing with folks face to face. On top of all of that, this pandemic has gotten really political. We've heard, I've heard it from at least one member that, and we've seen one member who refused to wear a mask during the special session back in December. I've heard that on the House side that there may be other Republican members who are pushing back against the masking requirements in order to be on the floor. So there are a lot of logistics to contend with this session that make it a little bit difficult and a little bit different than years past. The big changes that are happening in the session is that there have been a bunch of leadership changes in the last handful of months and a lot of announcements in the last month. So I think the biggest one, I'm sure you all heard, Speaker Kotek announced that she was both stepping down from Speaker and resigning from her legislative seat in order to concentrate on running for governor. That's going to be effective January 21st. We found out this weekend that the House Democrats will be nominating Representative Rayfield, who's the current Ways and Means co-chair, to fill that role. That means that the House Ways and Means co-chair position is now vacant, will become vacant. And there's a lot of speculation around who will do that. Representative Nathanson was the chair prior to Representative Rayfield, but she's got the House Revenue Chair and she may be comfortable there. We're hearing rumors of Representative Holvey, who is the Speaker pro tem. So there's going to be some continued movement there. We're also hearing that there may, I mean, going into the conversation this weekend, Representative Bynum made very clear that she was also going to be running for Speaker. She did issue a press release sharing her support for Representative Rayfield, but there could be another challenge on the floor for the speakership. For those who don't know, the caucus nominates a speaker, but it's a vote of the floor. So someone can get nominated and challenge the sort of the person who has been chosen by the caucus. So we'll see what's going to happen with the speakership on February 1st. On the Senate side, President Courtney announced that he wasn't going to run again. He is the longest serving longest serving legislator in the building. I believe it's 38 years. And he has been speaker for almost 20 of those years. President for almost 20 of those years. So he announced that he won't be running again, which means in 2023, we'll have a new Senate president. I think we're hearing a lot of names. Senator Steiner Hayward, who's the Ways and Means co-chair. Folks have talked about her wanting to be president for a while now. Senator Taylor. I heard over the weekend that people are talking about Senator Przonski, who's the chair of the Judiciary Committee. Senator Manning, who's president pro tem, and then Senator Wagner, who is the Senate Majority Leader and a former lobbyist. And there's a lot of history of majority leaders then going to those leadership positions. So it'll be really interesting to see. I think we're going to see a lot of posturing on the floor as folks are trying to figure out like who's going to be the dominant legislator. And then to the sort of lesser leadership positions, House Democratic leader Barbara Smith Warner is stepping down. Representative Fahey was elected to that position. She's out of Eugene. She's got an HR background. We've engaged with her in conversations around sort of the third classification of workers and mobile benefits. We've got both new House and Senate Republican leaders. Representative Drazen, who was the Republican leader for 2 sessions, stepped down for that position to seek the Republican nomination for governor, and she was replaced with Representative Brees Iverson out of Pilot Butte. Senator Gerard stepped down and was replaced by Senator Knopp out of Bend. The great news about Senator Knopp is that he has been in the legislature for a while. So we've got essentially a brand new leadership, if not for short session, then going into long session. And then on top of that, between retirements, resignations, folks leaving for higher office. And then unfortunately we had one legislator pass away. Over 10% of the legislative body in February will be appointed to their seats rather than elected. And at least 25% will have never experienced an in-person session. So all of that to say, the dynamics in the building are weird. We've got some new and newer folks, and we are losing a lot of institutional knowledge. So I think it'll be really easy to cause a little bit of chaos and really hard to pass big, complicated issues with these new folks. And then finally, sort of the general politics, separate from, if we weren't dealing with COVID, separate from all of these leadership changes, I think you all know there was a special session in December that addressed sort of the big emergent issues that needed to be dealt with quickly. It increased rent assistance and extended safe harbor protections. It included money for drought mitigation, because I don't know if you know, Oregon is experiencing a drought despite the water on the ground. It included money for Afghan refugee support. It addressed illegal cannabis grows. It was essentially this grab bag of big issues that were important to legislators around the state. And it sort of took away the big necessity for short session. Obviously, we still have budget adjustments that need to be done. There are still bills that need technical fixes, but they're unlike years past where there's been like cap and trade, there is not one gigantic issue that's going to keep people in or out of the building. So Republicans have walked out for 2 out of the last 3 sessions. That may be something that they're interested in doing again this session. I flagged on here, November 2022, we've got the entire House, half the Senate, and an open governor race up. And so I think there's going to be a lot of calculus about what sort of wins the Republicans want to allow the Democrats to have. So far, we've seen that they're not getting punished for their walkouts. So if it's a tactic that works, why not continue it? Even if they don't walk, there is also a conversation around whether or not rule suspension will occur. So typically on the floor, they suspend the rule that requires that bills be read in their entirety to help speed things along, because bills can get long and it takes a long time for someone to read a bill. Like 8 pages takes at least 45 minutes to read on the floor. We started 2021 with Republicans refusing to suspend that rule, which ground the legislature to a halt. Unfortunately, the first bill that sort of got out of committee, I'm sure you all heard, was a very long bill related to changing the Oregon Liquor and Cannabis Commission's board's name. And it took days to get through on both the House and the Senate side. So there are conversations happening around whether or not they will use lack of rule suspension to slow things down for the session, which when you only have 35 days can really impact our folks' ability to pass bills. There it is. Okay, so that's what it's looking like going into session. In terms of what we care about, just to flag some sort of the major issues in general that are coming up this session. There's a big discussion happening around ag worker overtime. It's a federal exemption that some states have addressed. That seems to be a big priority of the both House and Senate Democrats. There's some additional legislation around wildfire prevention. There are some workforce development bills. Specifically, there's an essential worker pay bill that's being discussed, as well as the governor has a $200 million initiative addressing underserved / low income populations who have been sort of the most impacted from the pandemic, figuring out how we can reskill them and get them into higher wage jobs. There is not at the moment a tech component, and Skip, you and I haven't talked about this, but there may be an opportunity to engage with the governor's office to include a tech component here. Whether or not the governor's office will be successful, unclear, but $200 million, and there is a lot of money going into session. And then, as I mentioned, budget adjustments and technical fixes to bills that passed in 2021. I will note, we have not seen the bills for the session. The things that I flagged here are things that we know from previous discussions or from legislative days, but there is a bill stat coming, and Thornrun and myself we'll be taking a look at it to see if there are any bills that are relevant to TAO. Typically, we track bills related to business employer issues, career and technical education, as well as STEM education in K through 12, anything taxation related. And then we're also going to be looking for relevant relating to clauses, which is essentially a bill that is related to something we care about, but the bill language isn't necessarily something we care about. So if there's I know that there is a small fix to the CAT tax that is not applicable to TAO's members, but until we see the bill, it could be a related to taxation bill that could allow for an amendment that is relevant to members. So we'll do a close review, and you will hear more from myself and Skip about sort of what are the overall, what are the bills that we're tracking for session. But three big issues, well, big for a short session. The first is the AG's data broker registry. This is a bill that came out of the AG's consumer privacy task force. Our discussions there were sort of temporarily paused so that the AG, through Representative Holvey, could introduce a data broker registry, which is essentially requires, it says here, requires entities that collect and sell brokered personal data to register with the Department of Consumer and Business Services. In our conversation with the AG's office, they made very clear that they may sort of overlap with words that we're defining in our consumer privacy bill. They're not going to be applicable. So discussions that are really happening around data broker registry are specific to data broker registry, and they're not like secretly trying to hash out big elements of the consumer privacy bill. This comes from legislation that passed in both California and Vermont, and I believe it still borrows from both, but Skip, feel free to correct me. I do want to note that we've been having really good conversations with the AG's office. I think they've really engaged in good faith negotiations with industry and advocates, and are really trying to pass something that we won't completely hate. I do think that conversations are still happening. There is still a red line being passed around. I think our hope is that we can end up in a neutral place, but I don't think we've seen final language back. And I will know that the drafter who wrote this bill is the same person who wrote the consumer privacy bill that came back very wrong. So no promises that what we all agree to is still the thing that we see when we get amended language during session. The second is a bill being introduced by Representative Nathanson, focused on creating a cybersecurity center for excellence. TAO and I saw on the call Charlie Kawasaka have been talking with Representative Nathanson, as well as the League of Oregon Counties, around addressing the gap in cybersecurity expertise for local jurisdictions. So this bill does a couple of things to address that. As I said, it establishes the Cybersecurity Center for Excellence, which is charged with overseeing, coordinating, funding, and providing cybersecurity education, awareness, and training for public, private, and nonprofit sectors. It's a partnership between Portland State University, Oregon State University, and the University of Oregon. And then it also creates a couple of funds, one focused on cybersecurity workforce development, another around securing cybersecurity goods and services to Oregon public bodies. There was a really amazing presentation in the Joint Information Management and Technology, and please believe me when I say that there's an amazing presentation, that there is a rarity in that committee, focused on sort of the gaps in cybersecurity at our within the Oregon's jurisdictions, basically pointing to that all of the infrastructure that we care about and need to exist is vulnerable to cybersecurity attacks, and how important it is that we start addressing this problem. And then finally, there's a fund around raising public awareness regarding cybersecurity threats and resources. This is an opportunity for TAO to partner with this work. And so we are going to be closely watching this bill unfold. I think we are also working to help advocate for it and helps ensure that not only that it passes, that money is allocated towards it. There is a lot of one-time funds available in the budget for this biennium, and this would be a great opportunity to take one step towards addressing the problem. And then finally, Rep. Marsh has a broadband bill. If you all remember, Rep. Marsh led a lot of the broadband related conversations in 2021. She has a bill that both reintroduces her House Bill 3256, which was not successful last session, as well as does a better job of connecting the Oregon Broadband Advisory Council to the Oregon Broadband Office, with the goal of creating a strategic framework for broadband in the state. Since it sounds like at least 200 million in federal funds will be headed towards the state, towards that work. And I think it's very clear that while the Oregon Broadband Office does some really good work, they are not adequately staffed to do the work that needs to be done. So anything that can be done to help bolster their work in the state is so important. I think the pandemic taught us all about everybody talks about it. Digital divide is a huge thing, and there's a great opportunity for the state to play a role in increasing access to broadband for Oregonians, and anything we can do to help that, I think, is really important. So we will be closely watching these 3 issues. I think the Cybersecurity Center for Excellence is where we're actually going to be doing some like advocacy work, going out and actually pushing for the passage of the bill. I think we are waiting for some feedback, more feedback on the broadband bill, and imagine that we may end up closer to neutral or support. And then with the AG's data broker registry, I'd love to be able to say that industry is fine with the bill, but I think we're still waiting to see how that language ends up. And so that's sort of what I know about 2022. As I said, we have not seen the full bill stack. There could be a bill that we love or hate in that stack that legislators just haven't talked to us about, which given the newness of members, as well as the remoteness of the last 2 years, I wouldn't be surprised if, there was something in there that folks just didn't talk to anyone about. But once short session ends, looking towards 2023, we're going to resume our conversations with the AG's office around, let's just say, consumer data privacy. I think we've all talked about this before, but Virginia, Colorado, and California have all passed legislation. California is now in the process of passing amendments to their legislation. That's how far along they are. Washington has been trying to pass a bill for several sessions now. TAO has been a member of the Central Table Task Force since 2019. We had plans to have a bill in 2021, but the bill draft came back very wrong and there was not time to amend. So we've been engaging in conversations through the fall. I think we've heard from Kimberly in the AG's office that we'll have some language sooner rather than later. I think everyone at the table is getting to the point where we're tired of having a conversation in concept and really want to drill into the language, especially since, as I've mentioned, the reason we didn't have a bill in 2021 is that the draft came back wrong. So anything we can do to be very clear about why the language that's being included is being included, the better for the drafter. And then with plans to introduce in 2023, I think based on conversations, we are probably going to get to a point where there is consensus on large parts of the bill, and then there are bits of the bill that we're going to fight on. As we've talked about before, that is probably going to be focused on a private right of action if that gets included in there. There's also been discussions around the table around, right to cure, right to know, global opt-out versus global opt-in. So I think that there are some sticking points that we may need to end up negotiating in session rather than negotiating leading up to session, which leads me to the next part, which is legislature outreach and education. In the fall, Skip and I had conversations with about 24 legislators, all with the goal of introducing them to TAO and the good work you all as its members do. And not just in sort of the traditional tech sector. I think part of the things we struggle with is that legislators think TAO and they'll think Portland and traditional tech, which is great because that's a lot of the work we're doing, but there's also a lot of overlap with ag and with education and big conversations that are happening around water and other natural resources. And so we want to make very clear that TAO can be a resource, that we've got folks in lots of different sectors. And we want to make sure that people have a baseline understanding of the work that you're doing, because we're going to have some really complicated conversations in 2023. And one of the things we've struggled with in the past is figuring out sort of who our legislative champion is, who's the person we're going to go to if we've got a big ask, or we need someone in caucuses telling legislators why they should or should not vote for an issue. All of that has gotten more complicated as people have chosen to leave or move or leave. So I think we'll need to sort of refocus post short session. I know we also have at least one person with a legislative background running for an elected position, which would be fantastic, but anything we can do to increase people's awareness of TAO and the work that you do is going to be really helpful once we get into what is hopefully a in-person long session where we're talking about some big issues. So that's what I've got. I'm more than happy to answer questions. The nice thing about short session is that it's short, so there's not a ton going on, but there are some complications heading into the session, and I'm more than happy to answer any questions. And if I don't know, I will let you know that I don't know and can get back to you.
So one question that we received, Rachel, and then I also want to kind of open it up. If folks are also interested in, asking questions about, hey, is there anything going on in the way of a discussion that's maybe not quite fully formed yet around 2023, or what are some things that we should be flagging for you all as we head into next year as well? That's also fair game in this session. We want it to be interactive. So the first question we got was any efforts to try to clog the session with what amounts to voter suppression bills?
That is a really good question, and I don't think so. I know that the Secretary of State's office is working with a coalition of folks around making online registration easier, but I think luckily with Democratic leadership and a Democrat as Secretary of State and a Democrat as governor, people can introduce bills, but they're not really going to go anywhere. And with bill limitations in short session, unless a legislator really doesn't have anything they care about or want to pass the session, it wouldn't be the wisest to introduce a bill that there's sort of no hope in passing. I say that knowing that someone is going to introduce something stupid or some anti-abortion bill that isn't even going to get a hearing. But for the most part, people are focused on things that actually have some chance.
Thanks, Rachel. Also saw that Charlie Kawasaki has his hand up, and similar to Charlie's approach, if anyone feels comfortable kind of popping on the video and raising their hand and wants to pose the question themselves, feel free to do so in this next portion. So Charlie, floor is yours. Go for it.
Thanks, Skip. Question for you, Rachel. Maybe it's a two-part question. If the Republicans walk out, does that basically halt the ability to pass any of the bills, the pending bills? And also, do you have any opinion or sort of general sense of optimism or not around the cybersecurity bill?
Yeah. If Republicans walk out, it halts all proceedings. Unfortunately, Democrats in the House and Senate do not have a quorum-proof majority. So some committees may be able to meet depending on their committee makeup, but and it depends on, if just House Republicans walk, then the Senate can conduct all of their business. So it definitely slows things down, but it doesn't necessarily, I take back what I said, it doesn't necessarily grind everything to a halt. It really depends on what it looks like. And yeah, I'm feeling optimistic about the cybersecurity bill. I think it's a bill without opposition, which is always great. It's a bill that takes sort of an understandable first step towards addressing the problem. It doesn't require the creation of like a state, like the state doesn't really have to do anything other than fund it. So it's set up to be as easy to implement as possible, recognizing that it's a legislative bill that does do something big. And, you know, there's a lot of one-time funding. I imagine the Ways and Means co-chairs will have questions around sort of what does it look like to provide funding for it in an ongoing sense in the next biennium. But if it really is sort of stand-up funds now, I do think that that's an easier conversation than saying, you know, we want 50 million ongoing in perpetuity. With the caveat that I don't know if any bills are passing this session.
Thanks for that question, Charlie, or the two questions. I also see we have Representative Karen Power with us this morning. She was one of the legislators that Rachel and I had a chance to chat with earlier in the fall, and just wanted to say welcome, and feel free to also jump in if you have some questions for Rachel along the way, or some thoughts.
Good morning, everyone. It is great to hear Rachel's update and very accurate overview of the 2022 forthcoming session. And she did a fabulous job outlining just the significant changes in leadership and experience. And with turnover comes a lot of opportunity. And for whatever reason, you know, a lot of legislators, myself included, don't come in with a tech background, probably because we could opine, but it's a little early in the morning. It's a lengthier process. I think tech ends up moving a little faster. But this is helpful for me to hear what you see as priorities for your organization and members ahead, and figuring out how to engage with us and help us learn along the way. We'll have a pretty big turnover this fall, and you'll have a new slate of folks to engage with.
And Representative, I apologize. I did not acknowledge that you got elected as Deputy Majority Leader. So congratulations on your appointment.
No, thanks. There's a lot of us in that role, so.
Leadership is leadership.
Thanks.
Thank you. And one thing I just wanted to mention as well, just in terms of general context, is we head into this year, our board at TAO had a chance to meet during our annual retreat at the end of last year. And one of the key themes that came up that they really want us to focus on in 2022 and beyond is really this focus around talent retention, recruitment, and development. And as many of you all know on this call, that's the number one issue that companies of all different sizes are facing, and not just in tech. And Rachel made a great point earlier, I thought, about how technology workforce issues now extend across everything: public sector, universities and higher ed, all sorts of business sectors, nonprofit. And as we're starting to get more and more requests from different organizations, they're trying to digitally transform and become more resilient. Technology is a key piece in that. And in order to develop and maintain a lot of the infrastructure, they need to have the right workforce. And so I think that as we're seeing with the pandemic changing how people live and work to a certain extent, tech workers in particular can live and work just about anywhere now. And so I think as we look at economic competitiveness and in Oregon as a whole, what can we be doing collectively as a community to help on the development, retention, and recruitment of talent? And I think that that's going to be the animating sort of principle that's going to help define what our economic development strategies are going forward. You make this place attractive to people who can increasingly live and work in a variety of places so they can build their careers, access amenities, et cetera. I think there's some interesting opportunities for us as a region going forward if we start to think about, you know, what are the roles we play. And the cybersecurity workforce bill is a key piece to that. It helps us both address some of the issues of under-resourced school districts, nonprofits, small businesses, and state and local governments who are under-resourced and are facing a ton of ransomware and other types of cyber threats, while at the same time helping work with university partners to train the next generation of cyber professionals, thereby helping all of the different entities that are resource strained or constrained when it comes to cyber threats. Want to pause there and see if we've got some additional questions from folks. And again, we encourage you to just kind of pop on video and fire away.
Well,
See Adrian.
Yeah, I'll jump in, Skip. Hi, Rachel and Representative Power. My name is Adrian Piermine. I'm with the consulting firm DKS Associates, and I specialize in transportation and technology, and connected vehicles is one of the areas that that I'm helping lead our practice in. I do a lot of work with Oregon DOT, and the Chief Innovation Officer, Maureen Bach, has mentioned draft legislation that's floated around a couple times around connected vehicles and the potential of mandating that all connected vehicles starting model year, I think the last draft legislation was 2027. I suspect that when it actually gets voted on, that date might push out a little bit, but I'm wondering if you know anything about this draft legislation that would mandate that all vehicles from that model year forward communicate into a still yet to be built data exchange program that ODOT wants to build and procure with partnership with the private sector. But this connected vehicle ecosystem is the name of the program that ODOT is going to be procuring. I was curious if either of you knew anything about that. I did not jot down what the House bill number was before, and if either of you happen to know that, that'd be wonderful. I will take a note this time, or I'll get it from Maureen next time. But curious if there's any thoughts or comments around that.
I had not heard of that bill, to be very honest. I'm not, my clients typically don't take me close to the Department of Transportation, but I'm happy to do a little bit of digging and can get back to you through Skip if that's helpful.
And
Sure.
Rachel, I don't know if you didn't follow our joint transportation interim committee hearing last week. I know that the transportation omnibus contains a couple of things that folks have been reaching out to us again about connected vehicles. My understanding was more Lyft and Uber again coming back. But let me put in the chat the link to our committee administrator's prep memo for us. And that has all three committee bills. That's the extent of which I've heard anything around transportation networks.
And I see, Skip, that one of the other meeting attendees here, Martin, has asked a question: what the purpose of the connected vehicle ecosystem? So very briefly, there's two main components to that. There's a intelligent transportation system component, which would allow the state DOT to get access to some limited data from vehicles to identify where there's maybe icy conditions or windshield wipers are on in a part of the state where we don't have detection or something like that, to understand what roadway conditions are like, as well as the ability for the state to push out to cars what it knows about roadway conditions, when lanes are closed and those kinds of things. And then there's a whole different component to it that's related to our road usage charge. So as a state, we've been a leader in exploring eventually migrating from the gas tax to a per mile usage-based charging program. And ODOT has been piloting using aftermarket technology to connect into vehicles to test the concept of road usage charge. But the only way it's really going to eventually scale across the state is if cars are actually communicating their location, but ODOT doesn't want it set up in a way that each individual car is communicating directly to ODOT. They want to keep that data private and run that through a private sector partners to try to keep the data anonymized. They only care about aggregated data around usage on Oregon states. But I could go, I don't want to dominate the meeting here, but that, in a quick answer to your question, Martin, that's what.
All right.
Thank you, Adrian, for the question and also the additional info. And Martin, sounds like you have a follow-up.
Yeah, I hate to be the triggered one here, but I'd really like to see more back-end DMV systems. I'll relate to a story. That's a true story, and it's my story. I was on vacation last Thanksgiving out of town. My car broke down out of state. I had to purchase a car out of state. Trying to register it here, we understand COVID and all that. So I had to drive to remote DMV, I think somewhere in Yamhill County, for them to do a vehicle identification number inspection visually in person. Did that, filed the papers. Long story short, there between back and forth, the final thing that I had to do was, of course, do an emissions test, and this is a late model Prius. So I did the emissions test. They print out a paper and they had to redo the vehicle inspection number, and I have to mail that in. There's no connected system that says, oh, you paid your fee, you passed emissions, you're good, let's issue those plates. To this day, I still don't have plates, and that was over a year ago. So I like, I'm definitely a gadget guy, and there's a lot of good bright and shinies, but I'd like to see the state make the government it has work better. And to me, that's an IT system. When at the DEQ, the emissions place, that's all computerized. They should be able to say it passed without me having to physically post a sheet of paper that they give me. So there's, I would really like us to be a 20th century DMV, and rather than all these nice to haves, I think it doesn't serve the taxpayer well. And I'd really like to see us focus on the systems that serve the taxpayer less than optimizing what we have. Optimizing is great, but the foundation you're building on here is sand. So I kind of am a little bit hesitant to spend more money on things when the basic things don't work. So hate to be the, I haven't had enough coffee this morning. That's why.
Well, thanks for sharing, Martin.
And Martin, I do want to say, I think that's a really real, and your story is not unique to your interactions with the DMV. I think that there are tons of people out there who have had similar frustrating reactions with all of the agencies. And so part of our hope in having these conversations with legislators is that by building affinity for TAO with them, we can also help in their work with agencies. So, a lot of times, while your story is very compelling and very frustrating, like that's not going to permeate the DMV. But if we have Representative Susan McLean, who's the chair of the Transportation Committee, asking these questions based on a conversation that she's had with TAO and its members, I think there's hope there that we can help with the sort of IT technological work that each agency is doing, because you all have expertise that the state doesn't have. And as much as we can be helpful to the work that they're already doing, in addition to the work that they want to do, it's so important. So please know that I'm keeping in my mind, how TAO and its members can be helpful to the agencies in general, not just how do we get them to do the exciting stuff of the future, which is also really key to the work you're doing.
Yeah, and I was going to say, Rachel, as well, like we've in the last couple of years definitely had a lot of conversations with everyone from, ODOT, Oregon Health Authority, financial regulation, even some of the, focus around the Secretary of State's office and corporations division about, again, mostly IT problems, right? So we've got interoperability issues. We have data that we're sitting on that could be valuable, but we don't know in what contexts. So I think that there's a recognition, at least at the individual agency level, that some stuff needs to change. And, with a new governor coming in later this year, that's always a chance to, look at new priorities and sort of a reset of certain issues. And that could be one that we can help kind of percolate, to Rachel's point, up, through our channels. And To the extent we're also working in concert with agency leaders who are also flagging this as an issue that they're facing, at the same time we're saying as consumers, taxpayers, hey, this is an issue that's important to those folks that we represent at the association. I think it's that multifaceted approach that's going to be most successful. And shifting gears for a sec here, Kurt Nichols posted in the chat, he was interested in hearing about anything that the legislature may do regarding tech training funding and support for our public universities and community colleges. And that's a great question. And I know that with enrollment being an issue at many schools during the pandemic, some of them are facing resource constraints for sure. And I know that what Rachel talked about earlier with the cybersecurity bill, which has a huge workforce component, the whole sort of basis of that is the partnership between our public research universities, as well as some of the community colleges like Mount Hood Community College that have been really successful in providing cybersecurity certificate programs and degrees and training. And so that is one example of a funding opportunity that the legislature is looking at for this session. And relatedly, Mark Lawler had also asked the question, in the short session, what can leaders from the tech sector help with most? Well, if we want to really focus in on a workforce challenge and kind of double down in a request for resources to scale the programs that are already starting to work, like these higher ed programs across universities and community colleges, one thing we're going to be asking of all of our members as we head into the next few weeks is, to the extent you care about cybersecurity workforce and workforce in general and helping to provide resources to our higher ed institutions, we want you to share your thoughts with members of the legislature, whether they're your representative in terms of the district in which you live or work. All of that is great. And they're going to want to hear from you. Even though this bill doesn't have opposition, we want to make sure that it gets across the finish line by the end of the session. And obviously, things are given more priority the more vocal the constituents are. So we want to make sure that we're able to rally a good group of folks. That's one way that people can make a big difference.
Yeah, absolutely. And if you don't want to talk to your legislator, talk to me and I will talk to your legislator, because the more that you can inform me, the better I can do my job advocating on behalf of you all. And I'll also flag again, need to spend more time with the actual proposal and the governor's office. I've got a meeting with them later this week, but the governor does have a $200 million workforce funding request. $100 million of that is to the Higher Education Coordinating Commission to actually implement the work. So there is a lot of money being talked about in short session around workforce. Not quite clear how all it gets allocated. I'll have more information for you all as I learn more. And again, doesn't currently have a tech component, but there may be an opportunity to give it a tech component. But there are significant conversations happening around investments into workforce. And
also, as we get the full bill list for the short session, we'll be sharing that out with our community and asking for input on the various pieces of legislation. And so that's another way too that folks can participate and provide meaningful input that we in turn will share with members of the legislature. And we usually post those in our Mobilize platform. So definitely stay tuned. And yeah, if you have specific areas of interest as well that you're intrigued by, as I mentioned, we're getting a lot of requests from agencies and legislators. Hey, we'd like to think about, like, for example, crypto and blockchain and what that means for, permissible investments and, securities reform potentially in 2023 during the session. And if there's a chance to, think about some of the newer technologies and what the implications are for Oregon, that's coming up next year. And so folks are definitely interested in hearing from experts in the tech sector around those topics. And that's just one example among many.
Yeah, Adrian, I really appreciate you bringing up connected vehicles. Now I'm going to go back and watch that committee.
Oh, hey, Skip, can I chime in a little bit on
Sure.
action requests? I've been told by the legislative analysts for the Joint IT Committee that we'll be looking for letters of endorsement for the cybersecurity bill. So that's another really easy kind of concrete thing. And I suppose that we might send out a template or something like that that people can start with. So please do expect that if you have an interest in that endorsements from industry would be extremely appreciated, and that request would be forthcoming.
Charlie, I wrote down right template for cybersecurity letter of support, so I got you.
All right. Any other questions? I know we're nearing the hour here, but we've got time for, I think, probably one more at least.
Skip, if there aren't any more, I have one more little piece of color to add on that cyber bill.
Sure.
One of the things that it does, at least in the current draft, is it also establishes both a council and a fund that authorizes the state to accept federal dollars to help our local governments solve their cybersecurity problems. And to add a little color onto that, we actually have about 1,500 cities, counties, and special districts, some of which are very, very small, and they're under ransomware attack. So one of the reasons why this bill has as much popularity as it does is because they've all raised their hands and said, this is an emergency. We have a problem and we need state funding to help solve our problems. So we've had a very large coalition of nonprofits and public sector organizations that are pushing forward with this to make it happen. And simultaneously, the federal government is, I guess, moving forward with, I don't know the exact status, the Investment, Infrastructure, and Jobs Act, but we believe that there will be cybersecurity funds set aside. And if historic pro rata portions are maintained, we would expect something on the order of $15 million to the state of Oregon coming through that bill over 5 years. There may have state matching requirements, and we have to put a council in place to do that. So in order to accept those federal funds. So it's a very high leverage activity. We can accept those federal funds, help our local governments solve their cybersecurity and IT modernization problems. And what the state needs to do is essentially pass this bill, give us the legal and statutory ability to accept those funds and provide some matching. So that's another big benefit for the bill that's above and beyond the Center of Excellence in the Workforce Development programs that it would stand up.
Excellent. Thank you, Charlie.
Yep.
Well, we're going to give everyone a few minutes back. I want to say a big thank you to Rachel for her time and expertise. Big thank you to all of you who joined today, and also to Rep Power as well for also sharing some of her expertise and inside knowledge. Really appreciate it. It's great to see you again. And we'll continue to keep you all updated as we get closer to session. And as you heard today, we have a bunch of outreach we'll be doing to you all, especially around the cybersecurity bill and some of the other topics we discussed today. As we get the full bill list, that'll be shared with you all as well. Thank you so much.
Thanks, everyone.
Have a great day.
You too.